Please don't make me watch another time travel movie again, Jacob.
What? You didn't like The Flash?
I can't do it. Can't do it again.
I don't know why these time travel like conversations just keep happening.
Yeah.
Like it's the cultural moment, man. Like everyone's doing time travel stuff.
Ironically, right? It's the moment that just keeps going on
It's
and on
the
forever.
moment
that
that just
you were
keeps
gonna
going.
say?
I see what you did there. Well played, sir.
Welcome to the Voyage podcast, a show that traverses the oceans of myth and legend through the lens of Catholic theology and philosophy. Come aboard as we set sail in pursuit of the heroic life and Christian virtue, with your hosts, Mike Schramm and Jacob Platty.
Talk up to another example of a movie that we're not enthusiastic about that we're going to talk about anyway, because again, it brings up important like concepts and whether it's good storytelling concepts, which will definitely come up in this episode too. Obviously superhero concepts, we just eat it up like catnip or whatever. So we'll just talk about superheroes too.
Well, we're just trying to stay relevant, Mike. We're failing, but we're trying.
How's that for so much enthusiasm in this one?
I suspect that we're going to make this, our conversation is going to be better. Our conversation about this movie is probably
more
going to be
entertaining
better
than the movie.
That's hey, and it pains me to talk like
but...
this. It pains me to talk like this because A, I was really looking forward to this movie. And B, I don't want to just like trash talk people's
That's
efforts,
the thing is like we don't want to become that critic who just exactly.
I'm not about that. And so I am going to be positive about this film. I've decided. I'm kind of.
Did you notice in the outline I put a little spot for fun surprises? So
you told me there wasn't going to be an outline this episode.
And I just can't help
it.
So I can't help myself.
That might have helped. I actually could have helped. That might have helped me prepare myself. Oh, you did?
I did send it to you.
Well, I never checked the things you send me. Yeah. Maybe I should read your text sometimes.
Sometimes you're leaving me on red, I think. With all that in mind, welcome everybody to this episode of the Voyage podcast. And so as you may have inferred already, or just from that super witty title, we're going to be talking about the new Flash movie. And I say new because it did just drop to Max.
Yeah.
Jacob and I didn't see it in theaters, which we
I
joined the big club.
This movie really panned by audiences and critics alike. Thus the title, just to explain the joke, because that's always good, right?
But we are going to be talking about the comic book adaptation, the animated comic book adaptation. We can also include some stuff about the Flashpoint paradox, just because those stories are related as well.
We'll get into that.
They touch on a lot of the same themes.
Yeah, and honestly, I totally encourage it. That's a great animated adaptation of a really, really cool comic line. So I don't know if you got an outline, then I guess we'll follow your outline, because Mike promised me,
it was just going to be.
He said this was going to be a no outline episode, and I was like, all right, winging it. And, he, of course, unreliable Mike, couldn't help but.
It's funny how when the cameras are rolling, you act as if you like take every word as law from me, when I've never had any sway over you when it came to this. You're the maverick. You're just freewheeling, like doing whatever you want.
That's our
why
charm.
You don't even bother
That's
reading
our
the text.
charming gimmick, Mike.
Yeah.
You make the plans and I break them.
Since there weren't enough people to have watched the movie to get the general overview. Plus, even when we were watching the movie, we struggled with the general overview when you and I were texting each other. You had already seen it. I was watching it.
And I'd watched it the day previous or whatever. And honestly, you were asking me like just questions, not like because you were just like, what'd you think of this? What'd you think of that? And my honest responses were like, I don't even know if I understood that. So that's kind of the problem. There's moments I'm being
that has
positive,
nothing to do with movies. That's not even when I'm texting you about movies. You're just like, I don't even know what you're, what that means.
Frequently my response to you is like, I have no idea what you're saying. Yeah, I don't get you, man. But to be positive, I just wanna say that, there are things about this movie that I do like. They exist. And so as our
Are you a
conversation
fan
can
of The Flash just independently of this? Like, were you always kind of a Barry Allen guy or a Flash guy?
yes, I would say that I am. I think that I actually got more into The Flash, um, frankly, in the 2000s and the 20 teen I guess actually it lasted for a while. There was the Arrow show on CW, and then that had spinoffs
Yeah.
into the Flash on CW. Um, those were all happening kinda after the Flashpoint paradox, um, or it's actually just Flashpoint. The animated movie is the paradox, but, like, the comic line
Mm.
is just Flashpoint. That Flashpoint comic line was sick. I mean, I think maybe it was controversial, I don't know, some people might not have liked it. I wasn't really paying attention to reviews at the time. I thought it was pretty neat, though, and, so
Mhm.
I kinda got more into Flash probably in the last, let's just say, like, 10 years, where I'm more of a Flash guy now.
And so if we're gonna say kind of the general overview of both stories is it's motivated by, the Flash wants to or needs to go back in time to change the past, which is like, okay, surprise, surprise. That's the premise of every time travel movie, right? Something bad happens, so the person has to go back to change it to prevent the bad thing from happening. So that's nothing,
Because per every human or hero's origin story, a bad thing happens. Namely, a dear
I
loved
mean,
one died, and so
and in this
that's how
case,
all superheroes start.
the twist is so the mom is killed and the dad is the one accused, and so he's not only going to save his mom's life but then also to save his dad's in or prove his dad's innocence, or I guess you wouldn't even say prove his innocence because then there would be no murder to
Yeah,
acquit him for, but
sure. No, that's true.
so
It's definitely in both cases the goal is to go save his mom's life. Just because he's sad because he misses his mom. Um, you have an outline. You go. Otherwise,
So, I mean, so that's and we jump right into it. I would remember being like, because I kind of knew the premise somewhat before I had started watching, and I was surprised at how quickly we jumped into that premise, which in one
yeah.
sense, you'd be like, okay, well, get the story moving, get it going. But it was very abrupt. It didn't feel like,
Yeah, he kind of just
there wasn't
decides
any
to do it
sense
on a
of like
lark. you know,
which
not
again, it's
quite,
like,
but
okay,
kind
we
of.
can if you're watching, DC movies, you can accept like, okay, we are probably at some understanding of running really fast gets you back in time just because it's a comic book. So that's kind of what we're faced with. Like I said, and very, very quickly. I mean, the opening scene is him. He saves a bunch of people at a hospital, but then it's like right after that, it's just almost out of nowhere. Um, he's gonna go back in time. And he goes into you had a name for it, and maybe they said the name and I missed it. It's like the time bowl or something.
It's Chrono Bowl. They call it the
Okay.
Chrono Bowl. So in the comics and in the cartoon, he has the cosmic treadmill, right? And this is typically what he uses to go and like get up to speed so fast that he can like break the time barrier and things like that. And
Mhm.
so my interpretation of this Chrono Bowl is kind of like the DC Extended Universe's version of that cosmic treadmill because it's like that. Like he stands in place and runs once he's actually in that chrono bowl. And so if there was like a
Mhm.
treadmill underneath him, it would look like what your typical cosmic treadmill type situation looks like. But I don't know, maybe they thought the treadmill was too cheesy. Um
I was imagining like he's standing on top of like a globe or the world and him running in place and the world is spinning by the way that his feet are
well, yeah,
hitting it.
yeah, it's like
So
it's
it's like,
spinning. Yeah, it's like he's like a hamster wheel, like causing like the mechanism to spin kind
yeah.
of thing. No, that's totally what it feels it
Or
comes across. I'm
well,
sure
and
it's
isn't that exactly what it was when it was it the first Superman where he spins around the world to make it go
yeah.
back in time? It's the same
Yes.
concept. I mean, it's the same,
Yeah,
similar sort of
because that's
concept.
how that works. If
So,
you just spin around the world backwards really, really fast
well,
and the Earth starts to
because
rotate backwards instead of like tidal waves and tsunamis and earthquakes, time will go
yeah,
backwards.
the atmosphere goes away and yeah.
Honestly, how
Well,
can I
and
even
that's
make fun of the Flash anymore when you just brought up that the first Superman movie ends like that? I mean, like
I
nothing
mean,
in this movie is as dumb as the first Superman's ending, and that's a great movie. I love that
whoa,
movie,
shots
and
fired.
so
Yeah.
I'm dead serious, dude. That's a terrible gimmick. And it actually kind of ruins this
Well,
like Superman. If you can just like rotate the planet backwards to like save everybody. Why don't you just like do that all the time? Not only is it like a goofy idea that doesn't make sense, it actually just makes all catastrophe meaningless because he can just undo it on a whim.
Well, that's all
Anyway,
time travel though, right? I mean,
well,
that's
that
any
there's
whatever mechanism you're gonna
most
use.
movies are like, oh, time travel messes things up. Like
Could he then fly out into space and do a big enough circle where all the materials of Krypton come back together and form a planet since that,
maybe that's
blew
what
up
he
or
was
something?
doing for Superman Returns. You know that movie? He disappears for 5 years.
The
The Brandon Ruth
so he
one. The
went out into
Brandon Ruth one.
space trying
Yeah.
to
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, honestly, this is also I like the Superman movies, I do. I mean, there's varying quality for sure, but they make weird decisions in some of the scripts of these movies. So, in Superman Returns, he straight just flies away for 5 years to, like, go find himself, like, go find his own planet. He's like doing, like, a
Mm,
cosmic spirit walk, I guess. I don't the movie just
mm,
says he takes off, and it's like, "You can do
yeah.
that, Superman? Like, you're gonna just, like, leave everyone to go like find your planet that you knew blew up. It just doesn't I don't know what you're trying to achieve here, fella. But I think we figured it out. He was trying to go find the
Just
pieces
spin yeah,
and
big
spin
enough
it
big
back
enough s
around
yep,
and
because
you
that's
get it.
how
You
time yeah,
figured it out. That's
it's
how that works.
I mean, so, but
This
anyway,
episode
so
was
we
worth
have
it
this,
just for
he
that
goes
nugget. I'll tell you what, like
just
I feel like this is no longer a
yeah.
waste of my time because a
Oh my
little
gosh.
piece of the puzzle has been put into place.
So there's a little bit of a pulling back the veil, right? Jacob comes in. That's his mindset as he walks in is that this is gonna be a waste of my time, and it's up to me to disprove
Justify
him
it.
of
Yeah, you
that,
need to
right? Yeah,
demonstrate to me every
exactly.
episode why I should
That's
keep coming
that's good
back to do
content right
these.
there. That's good content.
We're good at
So anyway,
this.
we have him the Flash goes back in time and, he does, but something, like, knocks him out of that Chrono Bowl, right? And so that's when he kinda finds himself, he confronts his past self. He was
Something
already warned
or
about it by Bruce Wayne.
someone.
Whoa.
Ooh.
And actually what
It
I was
looks like a
thinking is
person. It looks like he's kicked out.
it's a
So that's not
mysterious
a that's the
figure,
yeah,
and
mysterious figure kicks him out.
actually the way that they do present it, it does kinda make it look like is it, Doomsday in the Flashpoint Paradox? Don't they kinda make him look like that? Like, it gives you the viewer, if you're familiar, like, "Oh, is this gonna be, Doomsday who tries to, like,
Well,
hit him or fight?"
Doomsday is
Just, like, the
Superman's
shape of
big
him.
monster villain. I don't
Oh,
think
I'm
that
thinking of Death of
Doomsday
Superman. No,
yeah.
I'm thinking of Death of Superman.
Okay.
I'm
Oh, that's
conflating the
what you
2.
meant.
Never
Yeah.
mind.
He does look
But they
weird
do
though, for
make him
sure.
look
He
yeah,
doesn't look
like and we'll find out why later, but
well, we do. We find out what is it? The efficient reason why he looks that way. But
yeah.
I'm gonna I'm gonna mess these up. But I suppose maybe the final reason is so that we can identify this person right away. Because if you mess with his silhouettes, then it's much more
Uh-huh.
mysterious. But if he just looked
Yeah.
like a human silhouette, you know, it's not like this is
You'd
hard to
already
figure
kinda
out. Like,
guess.
you already
Well,
know
and
this
the
is gonna be a
spoiler
time
alert,
travel
it's like a future version of Barry. Yeah.
yeah, it's
Future
like,
Barry, future Flash.
I don't know if anyone was surprised at the reveal that, like, it was some weird version of Barry Allen that does this to
Yeah.
himself. But anyway, yeah, he gets
So he's
kicked
trying to
out by a
stop
mystery
him
figure.
because and again, it's to prevent this whole problem from happening in the first place, which it's just it's like folding the dough on itself over and over again, you know? It just keeps getting folded back on top of itself. So anyway, he gets
I'm
kicked
not
out
sure I
into
understood
this
that
very
analogy, but go on.
well, where the material just gets pushed back like, like the
Like, the
dough when
dough
you're
gets
folding the
doesn't
dough,
rise well because you, like, over kneaded it? I'm just
I
kidding. I don't
guess.
I don't
Okay.
it's your analogy.
Anyway, well, so and we sort of get a hint of this because we see, all these different versions of certain events that are happening, right? All these different berries that are in the Chrono Bowl, or
Yeah, the
later
Chrono
on,
Ball,
all
which
these
is a
different
cool look.
Karas.
I do think it's a cool looking effect. And so you do the way when he is going through time, the
Um,
way the visual effects that they use, I'll give kudos for that. Like he's running in sand, so that's like the sands of time, right? And
mm.
it's almost like this. I feel like there's like a toy or something like that that kind of has this effect where it's like you're saying, all these different like layers of things, but it's almost like a magic eye.
Oh, I
Remember
thought
magic
you were
eyes?
gonna say like I don't.
Really?
I can't. I
Google.
mean, I can't picture it right now. You'd
It's the
have to.
thing where
Yeah,
you
I'd have
look
to look
into
it
it
up.
and like a 3D image pops up. You have to like cross your eye. Okay, Google it sometime. People in the
Okay.
audience know what I'm talking about. Whatever.
Sure.
Like, it's a
So
cool look though. It's got a very cool look, the Chrono Ball.
now, what ends up happening is, of course, like a time travel movie, he confronts his past self. He kind of has to explain, like, well, this because this is before Barry Allen becomes the Flash too. So he has to explain to him, this is why I'm here. This is what's going to happen to you. And they get into a situation where he needs him, this past Barry Allen, to become the Flash. And in doing so, he himself, like Prime Barry or the first Barry from the beginning of the movie, loses his powers while the new Barry gains them, becomes the Flash. And so then that leads into its own sort of like misadventure of him trying to get his own powers back, Prime Barry. We also find this universe's version of Bruce Wayne / Batman, which, that wasn't
Well,
a huge surprise
let's
anyway,
go.
because we saw it in the trailer, was Michael Keaton.
Yeah.
But
Honestly, maybe a good way to do this is here's the thing: is there's the reason why this movie I can't in good conscience call like a let's just say I'm not sure convinced it's a well written movie. I think it's got good moments, but
um,
why does he lose his powers?
because when they do the thing that gets Barry to gain his, it goes through the first berry, the lightning does, and so
Hmm.
that like undoes it. So it undoes it for the first berry, and then it goes and hits the one after him, and that's what he gains it from. So it's almost like it's like turning an on and off switch. The lightning turned it on for the first berry the first time. Now it turns it off when he goes through it again. So if
So,
Barry ever
wait,
wanted to become
honest
a regular
question. Yeah,
person,
are you satisfied with the answer you just gave, Mike? Because like, how does that work? I mean, like,
I
I
it doesn't
get.
matter if I'm satisfied with it. I'm just telling you what happened. I don't
No, I
like
know, I know. I'm not
I didn't
blaming
write the
you. I'm
movie.
not blaming
I
you for
didn't
the choices of these screenwriters. I mean, like for one, yes, I understand that's what quote unquote happened. I'm just saying, like,
Yeah.
okay, like if you apply chemicals and lightning to Barry Allen, he
Why would those
gains
same
super
chemicals
speed.
undo it? Shouldn't he become the
Why? Yeah,
Flash squared?
why?
Shouldn't he become Super Flash or something?
Yeah, why you're adding to him? Why does it take away from him and simultaneously give it to the other version of him? I don't they don't explain that. And honestly, he loses a tooth and I
Yeah, I
they
don't.
kind of
That
focus on
was
that
supposed
tooth
to.
for
I don't
some
know.
reason. This feels like a movie that went through a lot of script rewrites, and when that happens, you tend to get like storylines that there's component elements that made sense when they were initially written because they were serving like a greater arc in the story. But if you keep rewriting it, all these story elements, it becomes this kind of like piecemeal script. And suddenly there are like elements that feel like they're supposed to mean something, but, or at least,
I felt like, yeah, like the tooth was supposed to just be kind of like the totem in Inception. Like it was supposed to just be the thing that it was almost like a continuity within the movie, because then it pops out at the end and it's sort of like, oh yeah, remember, like, so I don't know if that had
so it's
a
just a
super significant,
after,
like,
okay, so it's just kind of a joke.
yeah,
I get it.
I don't know. I mean, but
Because at
anyway,
the end
like
of
you
the
said,
movie, we'll
there's
get to it. At the
nothing
end of the
that
movie,
says,
we find out he's not back in his own timeline. And then the tooth
because yeah,
drops out.
it's
Well, we'll get there. But like, okay, well, the tooth thing might make sense then, I guess, in that regard, or at least
well,
be more
and
meaningful.
what we're sort of circling around a little bit, right? Or what we're standing in place of and what's circling around us, to use the Chrono Ball analogy, is
Nice.
there's basically two options when it comes to time travel, and they both seem to be inherently flawed. Okay, and we can see how, depending on which movie you're going to talk about, whether we're talking about like Back to the Future as a time travel movie, or we're talking about, the Avengers as a time travel movie, or we're talking about the Flash movie as a time travel movie, is you're going to fall into one of these two categories. And it seems like the Flash movie falls into the second, that I'll describe in a second. There's like the Looper, one timeline only category, where
Hmm.
it's like you go back in time, you have to fix this problem, but because there's only one timeline, there still has to be something that, like closes the loop. And there has to be something that, just like, I can think of actually the Time Machine movie, the Guy Pearce one that came out
Hmm.
like 20 some years ago. What motivates him to go back and to build the time machine and go back in time is because his fiance was killed, right? Very kind of Batman, killed his parents sort of
Very Flash-like.
motivation. But so what the thing is, though, is that in what he discovers when he goes back in time is that even if he saves her from the initial thing that killed her in the first go round, something else has to do it, or there has to be something there, because that was the thing that motivated him to build the time machine in the first place, was to save her. And so in order for him to have built it and gone back, there needed to be that same motivation, which ends up her being killed. Even if it wasn't her getting, murdered by, being shot, then she was hit by a car, or then she was, whatever.
Dude, I haven't seen this Guy Pearce
And
time machine movie in a long
it's okay.
time. No, I mean, I know I've seen it. Yeah, I've
it's the
seen it. I
same.
just kind of forgot it existed. But that
And
opening sequence where he discovers that he can't save her, that's very
yeah,
good. And eventually it's out of pure kind of like defeat that he just kind of like, what is he, like slump in, like, I don't know if he's drunk maybe, but he like slumps into his
yeah,
time machine and shoots forward a bajillion years. But
yeah.
not
Which,
after
I
he
mean,
doesn't
that's
go
not from the
through.
book. That's something
Yeah.
that's not from the
Yeah,
book,
that's in the movie, but not in the book. You're right.
it's just the movie.
But the movie does a good job with that because it does show him try to save her repeatedly, and it like, and
And
so
it
this
shows
is
the futility of the one timeline only version, which, like I said, that's your first option.
mhm,
But yeah,
absolutely,
sorry,
yeah.
go ahead.
Well, no, I was about to say, this is the type of, when science fiction writers or whatever philosophers talk about time, that is one of the things, like you're saying, it's like the universe will not allow you to create a paradox, right? And
And what are
so,
we really talking about? We're talking about fate then, we're going back
yeah.
to
Yeah, and so because paradoxes cannot occur, like they can logically posit them, but materially they cannot manifest, then there will always be some kind of reality, like something will prevent the paradox, cause the
the
events to
corrective, yeah.
yeah, there'll be
The
a corrective.
realignment.
Yeah. So that's what you see in the Time Machine movie. That's what you see happening in the Flash movie. We're gonna get into it. Um,
Well, the Flash movie's a little bit different though, because then the other option is
the
you
Flash movie
create the
kind of
new
wants to have
timeline.
both.
It wants to have its cake and eat it too,
Yeah,
and that's
it's
the
kind of doing
problem.
both. That's kind of
Is
weird. But yeah, keep
Well,
going.
and
Like,
and so does the Avengers Endgame movie. They try to kind of do the both and, because they recognize that there's this inherent problem with either one. So it's almost like, well, let's just kind of take piecemeal from both. But with the Flashpoint movie, yeah, it's always the motivation is that one timeline only, because before you go back in time, your experience is just the one timeline, your own, right? If you're the
mhm.
hero on this journey, so to speak. So that's always how it starts. I want to fix my timeline because that's the one where I experience my mom getting killed or my whatever, motivating event. But as, Michael Keaton in the Flash movie will say, or as so many others will say, is what ends up happening in order for the movie to kind of continue on forward without you going into this continuous loop. Now you can use a Doctor Strange reference too, right? If you remember from the first Doctor Strange, he goes into that loop,
Mm,
is you have to create a new timeline. But what does creating a new timeline entail necessarily is an entirely new universe. So
right.
now you're not just creating a new time, you're creating space, right? You're creating, and whether you want to say that you jumped into a different dimension or whatever, it doesn't matter. There's still more space. There's space there that wasn't there before.
So
And
what I think is, for one, another thing that I really liked about this movie is the scene where Michael Keaton um talks through
the
the
pasta
timeline, the
scene.
pasta scene.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
great That's a great moment, a scene that makes, at least it gives you something that you can tangibly like pay attention to, even if you try to like
Mhm.
logically think about it. I'm not sure it works, but it feels like it works. It feels like it works when you're like listening to him talk about it. There's this really funny
Well, and
moment
what
where Barry Allen's like, but what about, he's about to like actually offer like a philosophical, like, but that can't possibly work thing, but Michael Keaton
mhm.
just sticks like the spaghetti spoon in his mouth. That's literally the movie being like, don't think about this, just shut up and
Exactly. But
accept.
that happens in every time travel
No,
movie
I'm
where you
not
have
knocking the
the
movie. I
audience.
love the scene. It's
Yeah.
a very clever scene, and
The
that's a very clever way for the movie to be
Well,
like, don't
we are
think about
knocking the
this.
movie, but to be fair,
I'm trying to be
we've
a little
done
bit.
nothing but do that for the last 20 minutes. But anyway,
Oh,
no, like you said, there's always that audience stand-in who is going to ask the logical question, which again, it's the writers of saying, we get it, okay? We get that this isn't, but shut up and watch the movie, right?
yeah,
Just enjoy the explosions,
just
okay?
enjoy the pasta.
Enjoy the pretty pretty people in the explosions. But
Hmm.
anyway, What's funny though is in before the when he's using the dry noodles and he creates the break,
The
what is he
fulcrum.
describing? Yeah, and well, what is a fulcrum but a nexus event, right? Go back to our
Oh,
Loki series.
are
It's a
you?
nexus event, or go back to Across the Spider-Verse, it's a canon
No,
event.
it's a
It's
canon
like
event. This
all we're
movie this
doing,
movie is canon event based. It's and
it's
fascinatingly
like
so.
we
Honestly,
can't have
we
we yeah, we can't get out of it. We can't get out. We're burying the loop. We're going like,
well,
you know,
here's where I feel like this episode is going to take us, this conversation, because even when we talked about the time episode, it was mostly talking about like Chronos and Kairos and, liturgical reality and things like that. And then when we talked about Across the Spider Verse, we talked about canon events, but I mainly moved that conversation into I'm not sure, we talked about like the moral quandary of it. We were more talking about like the ethics of it and whose is Spider-Man 2099 really a bad guy, and canon
which
events kind of have to happen. Like we had this kind of like ethical
Which that
conversation
is
about
what
it.
that movie concerned more anyway, because
Right.
that was the big concern in Across the Spider-Verse, whereas here it's not even that so much,
Well, and
but
so what I want to point out to you is in neither of these episodes have we really talked about fate and just kind of like wrestled with the concept of fate all that much.
mhm.
So one good reason to have this conversation about the Flash movie is that it's like our second chance. We're getting a second chance, Mike, to have a
Oh,
conversation
yeah?
about
We should have
canon
gone
of
back
fate.
in time first to do it,
Yeah.
yeah. We
we
should
get to we get to have a conversation about how fate plays a role.
if
Um
only we had had more time, you know?
yes, or more opportunities because every TV show is about time travel and fate now. Um but
Isn't that funny though that it's like the more things change, it's like once we've stepped back into that kind of pre-Christian mindset, we just are doing the we're just
everything's about
recycling it. We're
fate.
recycling the same Greek mythology. It's like, oh, you
Yeah,
mean
the same
the
Norse
big enemy in
nihilism.
all Greek myth? Yeah,
Mhm.
is the same pre-Christian enemy is always fate. And it's like once you lose that sense of linear time where you're ordered towards a messianic fulfillment,
Mhm.
whether it's the
Right.
first coming of Christ, in the Old Testament or the second coming of Christ in the Christian age, then you inevitably fall back into that cyclical time period, sense of time.
And it's funny, this movie actually even has Michael Keaton's Batman give voice to this, because in that pasta scene when he is beginning to talk, uh how did he phrase it? Like I won't be able to like recreate it. Um but he basically says like it's all meaningless. When it's early on in the
That's
conversation,
yeah.
and it's before he gets into like the later like using the pasta to describe things. But he, or at least I think it is, I don't know. But he has this moment where like you get a glimpse into Michael Keaton's character where it's like he kind of gave up because
Yeah.
he fell into this like everything's fate. None of it matters. We don't everything we do doesn't really change anything kind of thing.
Mhm.
Um which is
Which is again, then why do you have fulcrums or why do you have canon events? It's like you've just said that this event is so important that it has to happen in every universe. So then that must be kind of important, right? And what's so funny is why do only the superheroes get canon events? Doesn't every person, right, get a canon? It's like so then it's like you've got all these, fulcrums. What I mean, it the
in
tangled
theory
webs we weave.
yes, well, it would be a tangled web, very across the Spider-Verse.
Oh, I can't
But
get it out of my head, man.
I know, right? Instead of so Flash has pasta bowls, Spider-Man has webs, but they're basically the same thing. Just one's
I
a lot
mean,
cooler than the other. One you get at Olive
yeah, but
Garden, the other one you get
I'm guessing one is an allusion to the flying spaghetti monster. That's what I'm
oh,
going with.
yeah, that would be
That's the
fitting, wouldn't it?
nihilism. Yeah,
Yeah, it's the nihilism coming
exactly.
through. Um,
Uh-huh.
before we move on from Michael Keaton, like this moment, one of the things that really disappointed me about this movie is I was so excited to see Michael Keaton's Batman come back. I was so excited to return
I
to
remember. I remember when the trailer came out.
yeah,
I
and I was
remember we were
like,
talking about that.
"Yeah, they're bringing back Michael Keaton's Batman. Awesome. That is fantastic." And when you first meet him, he's just like the dude from The Big Lebowski. They've taken Bruce Wayne as played by Michael Keaton
Mm.
and turned him into kind of like a loser, kind of just like an old
Well, a guy who's given up
fogey,
because, like you said, what else do you
in
do
like the
once you
most in like
realize
the most
everything's
like belittling way though. Like he hasn't like he's kind of he's like Thor in the aftermath of
Oh, yeah, for sure.
what's the first one called? The two-part end.
Infinity War.
Yeah, it is Infinity
Infinity
War.
War.
Yeah, I got mixed up. It's like, okay. They just have to like tear these heroes down a peg, right? Like they just have to like, oh,
Deconstruction,
remember
man.
that guy you loved when you were a kid? Well, this is what he turned into
Mhm.
30 years later. And it's like,
It's
what?
a deconstruction
What?
destruction.
And
That's all the
well,
now this definitely has to come out before October. It's a
yeah.
deconstruction destruction.
Wow, he's
That's a little teaser.
that's a little
It's a
time
little
that's a little
teaser.
multiverse right there because we're,
Yeah.
anyway,
No, 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 just leave it out there as a teaser. We don't have to
I'm
explain it
not
anymore.
saying
It's
nothing.
coming.
It's
Yeah.
coming. Ominous. But,
Mhm.
I couldn't believe that's kinda like what they in the Flashpoint comic line, the Batman that Barry Allen has to find to help him fix the, things that he's done, is Thomas Wayne. It's not a different version of Batman. It's a different version of Batman, but it's not Bruce Wayne. It's actually this world in which Bruce was shot in the alley, and Thomas, his father, turns to a life of vengeance. And in his case, it's not about justice at all. It's just all about vengeance. So he's a very dark
Yeah.
version of the Batman persona, but he's also really cool. Like
He's
people
still
really
fighting bad
love.
guys.
Well, he's still fighting bad guys. People love him though. Like he is
Mm.
because people like dark, gritty anti-heroes, right? And
Whereas
so
Michael
it's
Keaton's just kinda pathetic. He's just a
yeah,
pathetic
he's
figure
just a
is
pathetic
sort of
person by the time you find well, and like it's not he's
and
clearly
pathetic
still
in the true
super
sense of the term. Like, it's like you feel bad for him, sort of.
yeah, well, he's just
Yeah.
given up. He's still capable of being an awesome fighter and things like that, but he's sitting in his mansion painting weird ham paintings or something like that.
He still has the
Yeah.
potential to get nuts, but he doesn't get nuts. I
Not
mean, right
not
away at
yet, not
least.
right away.
Yeah.
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 So it's like that's a weird way. And I mean, I get it because at the end there's this line where like, you know, Barry realizes he can't save everyone, and one of the people he can't save is Batman. And he's like, I'll try to bring you back. And Michael Keaton's like, you already did. And it's like, okay, I
Ah.
see what you did there, right? But in order for the
Mm.
script to have Barry bring Batman back, it has to cast Batman away. And it's
Mm.
like that's just I guess that's one way to do it.
It's a
There's
redemption arc.
they could
It's
have
a redemption arc.
he could have been moody and brooding in his bat cave. Instead, he's like a boomer, like he's in
Mhm.
like like
See, this is the real
karate
motivation of the
pants,
writers is that it takes us, the young people, to save the older generations. Isn't that the real metaphor
kind of
going on?
feels yeah, I guess I could see that. Anyway,
Yeah.
disappointed with how they handled Michael Keaton's character. Um,
So I think I don't know, maybe we've covered enough. Like I said, the general problem with time travel, you got the two options. It's the one timeline only where you have to just go in this loop you're fated to, which actually ironically, Barry Allen says, I think it's near the beginning, maybe in the first third of the movie, that it all comes back to fate. Do you remember when he says that or who he says that to? But
well,
he does say, and I remember thinking, oh, here we go, right? It's that it's gonna,
so here's the thing. I don't hate the idea of canon events as they pop up in these movies because, and I did talk about this in the Across the Spider-Verse episode a little bit. I think that it's a corollary for like Providence. I think it's a corollary for the kind of like order of the cosmos that God has in mind. That is not just
Mhm,
spatial, but also, you know, temporal. It's also he's
mhm.
got a game plan across time, and things aren't going to confound that plan, right? And so these canning events concepts they strike me as a um, corollary to that, or at least a kind of representation of that. And
Yeah.
I do like
It implies that there's a plan. Where it becomes disingenuous is when you also try to say there's no plan, but these have to be part of the plan. And it's like, well, which one is
mhm.
it?
One of the things I do think that this movie does try to give you an answer in a kind of oblique way, where a couple times there's conversations. Early on, he talks to Ben Affleck's Bruce Wayne, who's wearing a really weird bat suit in this, by the way. His bat suit in this movie
Mm,
looks like a toy bat suit, like the type of like
okay.
I don't know, weird choices. But he's talking, Ben Affleck has that line, our pain defines us, our pain makes us who we are and things like that. And
Mm,
uh, there's a purpose to the pain, is what he's saying. That it makes us who we are. Something I can kind of get behind, frankly, as a Christian. But when he tries to avoid the pain, when he tries to change it, when he tries to, you know, remove it, uh, mess with the canon event, if you will, now
yeah.
he's the worlds get destroyed, right? As the
Mm,
story of this movie proceeds, he takes, you know, basically this younger version of himself. He gets trapped in this time with a younger version of himself. The younger version of himself has to learn how to be the Flash, more or less under the tutelage of the main Flash, Prime Flash, as Prime
mhm,
Flash figures out how to initially just try to get back home because he gets kicked out of the Chrono Bowl and then immediately loses his powers. But then B, Zod shows up. So in the Flashpoint comic, the big problem is that there's a World War III happening between Atlantis and Themyscira, the Amazons led by Wonder Woman and the Atlanteans led by
mm.
uh, Aquaman. It's a
Aquaman.
really cool
Mm.
idea, and it's a fascinating like alternate universe. Um, in this one, Zod shows up, just like from the first Man of Steel, like the Man of Steel movie,
Kind
and
of a continuity thing, yeah.
it is. They do a good job. I think it was a clever use of the cinematic timeline to use that as the world-ending event. I mean, would I have liked to have seen a World War III scenario between Atlanteans and Amazons? Yes, that would be incredible. And so I don't know if we're ever going to get to see that. But anyway, clever in context of these movies. And there's
Yeah.
no Justice League, and that's why he has to go find Batman, and that turns out to be Michael Keaton, which raises the question, is this in fact the same movie universe as
I was
89
almost gonna
and
bring that up.
92?
Yeah,
Because that's
yeah, I was
the
almost gonna bring that up to you.
implication is that we
If
are
it is
in
Keaton, then it
yeah,
should
it's
be
that
the one.
universe, right? And I do think it's true that when he goes to the crime lab in Central City to, redo the Flash origin story with, like, the young Flash,
Mhm.
it's very Art Deco. That building is, like, super,
Like, they
super
try to make
Art
it look
Deco
like
looking, and so it makes me
yeah.
wonder, it's like, is that because the architecture is actually meant to be the cities are, like, still Art Deco-y, just like Gotham
I
is
would
in the Keaton
imagine, yeah,
movies?
that they were trying to make the set design
So
resemble.
kudos. So there you go. Another positive point. Kudos to you filmmakers for
Well, and it's
leaning into
also
that.
I mean, another thing because obviously that one was made in the '80s, which is we're still have this kinda Cold War idea hanging over our head, and so where is Kara? She's being held by the Russians,
By the
right?
Russians, which
Or I
so
should yeah, the USSR, I guess it would be,
it's
at
yeah,
the time.
do they say Soviet? I forget if they actually call it a Soviet detention
I don't
center.
remember either, but you
Yeah.
definitely it's like
It's got that vibe
that's
for
not an
sure.
accident.
No,
So,
it's very much playing into it. It's also one of the things that this movie has done, is take elements from all these different types of like Elseworld type stories. There's a very famous Superman Elseworld tale called Red Sun, which
yep.
is a great story, and it's this hypothetical situation where Clark Kent lands in Soviet Russia instead of
Mhm.
Kansas in the height of the Cold
Yeah.
War, and that's a very fun story. Batman is like a resistance fighter in the Soviets and things like that. Um, and
Mm.
I think that's what I took from the movie. Like when it's like, oh, this superhero from another world landed in Russia. It's like, oh, they're pulling a Red Sun riff on that.
Yeah, like it's again, a vague
It had
allusion
to
to
have
it, but
been, yeah.
I was just saying that it also kinda plays into what you were saying where if this is Michael Keaton Batman, then but he
It's
was
like kind of
also
Cold World,
significantly
yeah.
older, so
No, but
it wouldn't
it's an alternate
necessarily have to
reality,
mean that
so it makes you wonder if like the Cold War never ended, right? In this reality,
yeah. Yeah, and I
I don't
guess
know.
even if you're saying it wasn't the USSR or not, it would could still be this, well, there's still kind of this whatever
nefarious.
hanging
It's nefarious Russians in
aggression. Yeah.
Siberia doing human experiments.
Again,
You
yeah,
know,
it's like
it's very
so.
Cold War-y. Yeah, it fits. It fits in like the throwback to the '80s nostalgia. Um,
Sure.
and it's a great action sequence when he goes and he busts out what you discover is not Kal-El, but Kara, Supergirl.
Mhm. And we actually find out that in this world, do you remember when Zod says that they actually killed Kal-El as a baby?
Yeah, brutal.
Which again is it's, I guess you could say it's a big reveal in the story. At this point, I'm just kind of like, well, what am I going to be surprised about in this movie? Like what's going to happen
Yeah,
that's going to like shock me? So
right.
I was never like, oh, you mean they killed? It's like, well, no. Again, like you said, this is an alternate universe anyway. So what this does though is go back to my other option. So again, we've talked about the one loop, the closed loop option. The other one is that you're like when you create all of these different, timelines, all these different streams, is that inevitably it's going to make them seem, each one is going to seem less important, right? And so when you create this, not just this multiverse, but this seemingly infinite multiverse, is that it's going to make each individual one less significant, or sorry, yeah, less significant. And that's kind of the feeling that you're like, I inevitably have when I watch these is, well, okay, fine. Just grab Superman from some other universe and have him come over, or grab 10 Supermen from 10 other universes. And just cause it's like, that's all it eventually becomes, you know? It's like,
Yeah,
okay, so you
everything
beat
just
this
kind
bad
of.
guy one. I mean, and
I
so
Hey,
yeah,
that is kind of what they do. Oftentimes,
it's what
there's like
you
a
can't
million
help it.
comic storylines where it's like this person from this universe has to come into this universe in order to like save that
Yeah.
universe. You know, like there's always
And
just someone
everything
else
becomes
outside of you to.
arbitrary.
Mm.
Everything becomes arbitrary then. And that's kind of that's the issue with the second one, with the creating multiple timelines is, I mean, that's not the only issue, but that is inevitably an issue when you start to watch those, and what ends up happening here in this Flash movie too.
The I don't know if we even in the course of our conversation thus far really laid out like you started to. And I think I derailed you, but like you were saying, option one is that you have like
Are you
fate.
that kid? That doesn't sound right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know. In a multiverse, everything's bound to happen eventually. And so me derailing the
You mean
conversation
a
was
Jacob who
inevitable.
stays on track? That doesn't seem like
That
that. I feel like the
you're gonna have to
canon
go through
event
a
is that
lot of
you get me
multiverses to
off track.
find. Yeah.
No, you
Yeah,
getting
your
me off track
canon.
is a canon
This is
event.
the
It is
canon event for
unavoidable.
yes.
Yeah.
Don't worry, but I'll always be
Right.
there like Barry Allen who can't let go to bring us back. Keep trying
You're
to bring
the
us
like
back.
you're the super deformed Barry Allen, then
I am the
you're the one that
super.
shows up at
That's
the end.
right.
The
Yeah.
one, yeah.
Um, what you had said earlier in the conversation was that there's like a fate version of time travel stories, and I'd added, yeah,
Yeah.
like because the universe won't allow paradoxes to happen. And
Mhm.
the alternative is a multiverse scenario, right?
Mhm.
And the I don't know. I think that people would retort to your criticism of the multiverse thing that it doesn't make their experience of life in the world they live in any less valuable to them kind of thing. Um,
Mhm.
but I find that I guess I kind of sit somewhere in the middle between that type of retort and kind of your criticism of multiverse stories is I agree that the life we are given in this world, in this reality, um, is still ours. It's still our experience. We still that means something, because
Mhm.
it may not be your life, but it's my life, and I care about it. But to your points, yeah, I do think that it just feeds into just another example of how unimportant and how, irrelevant and kind of mechanical.
Well,
Like,
and this actually, so what I know I didn't articulate it as well as I would have liked, but it's not the inherent issue that we're going to inevitably like stop caring as much, because like you said, a person can always just decide to care more, right? So that's more extrinsic too. But what's inherently problematic is that they both end up becoming materialistic, and materialism in the sense of all that exists is the material. Because
Mhm.
what we've essentially done is we've reduced, when we say that you're traveling through time, but really what you're doing is traveling through space, is you're reducing the time, which is non-material, to a material thing, to just another version of space. And so that's where, again, it will inevitably lead to, because again, all that's what materialism inevitably leads to, regardless of what you personally might feel in
Mhm.
terms of how much you might care. And so that's where, like I said, I maybe made an extra jump without kind of explaining it, but that's the problem with, like I said, timeline creating or timeline jumping, is that you've just reduced time to another version of space. You're
It's a
not
really
actually
good
time
point.
traveling. You're just space traveling. It's
Well,
space
that's
travel,
true,
which again,
right?
space travel is cool, but let's call it for what it is, right? And that's all jumping a timeline is space travel.
Did you have you ever read Timeline by Michael Crichton? They made a movie too. The book was quite good. It was a Michael Crichton
Um,
novel in which he goes back and it's his time travel book. But out the gate, he actually just lays out right out front that this is actually not time travel. It's
uh-huh.
multiverse traversing, and the
Yeah.
characters in that book are sent to a version of Earth that is simultaneously taking place in the 1400s instead of the 2000s
So
when the book
yeah, I
takes
think
place.
that the movie sounds familiar. I'm sure I have. I don't think I've read the book, because the book doesn't sound familiar as like me actually like reading through it, but I can kind of vaguely
It's kinda
like
great. I
picture
like
like a
the
scene from
book.
the movie.
The movie is kind of forgettable, but the book's quite good. Michael Crichton's a great author. Like, all of his stories are
Well,
interesting.
that's, yeah. I mean, he's Westworld, he's Jurassic Park, he's
Mhm. Andromeda Strain
there's
and,
another.
well, he did all he had really broad, like, like,
I mean,
the 13th
and
Warrior, or, that's not
I,
what the book was
oh
called,
yeah,
though.
that's right.
But he did that
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
Yeah,
I saw them. I did see the movie on that one. So it's funny. I mean, he's incredibly like a bunch of his movies not only sold well, but a lot of them were turned into successful movies too, not just Jurassic Park.
he
Um,
had a book that
but
was published, I think, posthumously. It was a pirate one. I read it. I can't think of the name of it. Something
yeah.
whatever. He wrote a pirate book. Michael Crichton wrote a pirate book, though, and there's a kraken in it
Well,
because Michael
well,
Crichton, as much as he was like a super scientist guy, he also is wonderfully agnostic. And so, like, basically in this pirate story, he's like, if people claim to have seen sea monsters, then I'm just gonna throw a sea
who am I
monster in
to?
this. Yeah,
Yeah.
because people said it was there. So good job, Michael Crichton. Wherever you are. But is that dark? Is that
I mean, he passed away. Yeah,
he did
I was
pass away.
like, did you not know that he passed away? I
He
mean, he
did.
did die. I thought you meant like an afterlife thing, and I was like, well, Jacob. I mean, yeah, I guess we don't know, but anyway. So, uh, moving on.
Hey, we're getting to the end of the movie here because all right, so let's talk
Yeah.
about how this movie ends because this is where like I'm okay with most of this movie. I don't really mind as such. And I think there's a lot of
No,
like I think there's a lot of like heart behind the story of Barry trying to save his mom. And there's some really poignant moments towards the
I didn't
end that
roll my eyes super hard at it either. I was just kind of like,
well, I just
and
think
I
that
don't
like
have like an emotional attachment to the Flash. I don't have an emotional attachment to Michael Keaton's Batman. So I wasn't
yeah.
like, so offended by any of the directions that it took either.
Well,
I
it's
was
just
just
by
kind
the
of like,
time you get
well,
to the end of it, well, no, the problem I do have a problem with is in the sense that like I can accept a time travel story that's paradoxical. Half of them are, right? And that's part of the fun of time travel,
yeah,
whimsy,
yeah.
let's call it. But this one just feels like it doesn't make sense in a way that's not doesn't strike me as whimsical. Just strikes me
There's
as
a
like
so
poor writing or something
Well,
like
there's like this principle in writing, which of like a nonce belief and a fixed norm. And the nonce belief is the one where it's like, okay, we're going to accept that, these pigs built a house, or that this goose laid a golden egg. Like, it doesn't happen in quote unquote real life, but you
mhm,
suspend it for the sake of the story. And again, the more complicated the story gets, the more that we might be expected to suspend
mhm,
in order for the fixed norm, the thing that, we can kind of take for granted, or what helps us kind of enter into the story. And it's one of those where, yeah, like it it just seems like, how much of this are we supposed to like
Well, let's
just
just go
accept, and how
through
much of
it.
this
Let's
can the
just,
movie actually question? And
for my sake, let's go through this. So Barry Allen, he goes back in time to, influence his mom not being killed. He ends up in a alternate version of reality, a multiverse scenario, with a younger version of himself. He goes and experiences that universe's version of Zod showing up. And in order to prevent Zod from destroying that universe, he goes and breaks out Kara Zor-El, Supergirl. Um, but in the midst of doing that, discovers that he can't save that universe. Everything they do, they keep doing. They keep going back in time. Uh, and nothing they do, the two flashes. Because at this point, he's gotten his
mhm.
flash powers back. Like Prime Barry has gotten his flash powers back. So now you have two flashes on the scene trying to fight all these
He gets struck by
Kryptonians.
lightning again. It's a light. Well, yeah,
Somehow
he
the
recreates
lightning,
the
yeah, I don't know. It gave it the lightning bolt
snip,
take
snap, snip, snap,
the
snip, snap,
lightning
snip,
bolt
snap. It's
giveth, the
a
lightning bolt taketh away, the lightning bolt give it back, I guess.
yeah. Blessed
And
be the name of the lightning bolt. Yeah, that's the.
and
We
so
didn't
he,
even. We just jumped over that too. That's just another nonce belief. Just like okay, we just move
yeah,
on.
which
Yeah.
is whatever. These are superhero movies. I don't mind just ignoring silliness, but like this movie doesn't do
Oh,
a good
this
enough
this
job.
did a lot to try to be silly, and I was kind of like, oh, so he. I
Yeah.
texted you. I was like, so he's just a goof. Is that kind of the
Oh, no,
like?
I mean, briefly, one thing that I do think is funny, because what I said to you in our text threads is this is not my favorite version of Barry Allen. Back under
Mm,
Zack Snyder's direction, Ezra Miller and Zack Snyder turned Barry into this really neurotic, weird, socially awkward. I mean, kind of autistic, right? Like, I'm not saying that belittlingly.
well,
Like, he has antisocial quirks. Like, he's a weird, like,
it's
well,
kind of like. It's kinda like Ezra Miller's character in The Perks of Being a Wallflower. It's kinda like he's playing the same character, now he
yeah.
just has superpowers. If you remember that movie or seen that, that's
I
going back
haven't
a
seen it,
few
but
years
I've
now.
I've heard of it.
Emma Watson, Logan Lerman, it's,
I
it's a
heard it's
good
pretty
coming of
good. I
age
actually
teen
heard it was a
movie.
pretty good coming of age
Oh,
story. I just haven't seen it.
oh yeah, no,
Well,
it's
anyway,
fine.
this is a very different take on Barry Allen, who tends to be a far more traditional heroic person, you know.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, whatever. What are you going to do? So I accept the fact that that's the type of take they're going to have on Barry in this universe. But it's not my favorite. And one of the things that I think is kind of funny about this movie is when you have two Barrys together, like your main character Barry, like the prime Barry, he can't
Can't stand the
stand
other
the
one.
younger Barry. And it's like, thank you. Like,
Yeah.
good job, director. Like, or screenwriter. It's almost like you're taking a meta commentary on this version of
Mhm.
Barry Allen that like the Snyderverse created. And it's like, oh
Yeah.
man, this was not a good take, kind of thing. So there's a
Which I
fun
guess
meta
could be a
commentary
point
there.
of growth for him, right? I mean, every time we have to do a little self-reflection and look in the mirror, that can be an opportunity for
That's
growth, and
probably
so that's maybe the metaphor that's happening in this, right? Is now you
it's true.
literally, instead of looking in a mirror, you're looking back at yourself, so
It's true. So anyway, that tangent aside, um, so he discovers, the main character Barry discovers that everything he tries to do in order to save the world from Zod doesn't work. And by this point, young Barry has discovered that middle Barry or prime Barry was trying to save their mom who dies. And young Barry doesn't want his mom to die. And so young Barry is like, no, 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 you can't. And I mean, this is where the movie, there's actually a lot of like bold choices being made in the script. I'll applaud what's happening here because young Barry is basically faced with apocalypse. It's not just his mom's death, it's the death of his entire
well,
world.
that's the
According,
thing though, that's go back to the pasta scene where Michael Keaton says, "You not only create a new way going forward, you create a new way going backwards." And I said, "So wait a second. If you're the first person to invent or discover time travel, you create an entire universe. Like you're the god. Like you're the creator now." And it's like that's what time travel essentially does. Is
mm,
it turns you, the time traveler, into God, right? The Lord of Time. And again, they without saying it, they basically say it like you said. he not only creates this world, but now he dooms this world too.
Yeah, it's
So
pretty
it's like
dark.
now, instead of being responsible for the death of your mom, you're the responsible for the death of this entire that you've created, because he went back and like I said,
In
the
fairness, a
fulcrum
lot of the
turns.
like even the Flashpoint comic story actually kind of ends that way. With like
Well,
just like a
I'm
doomed
not even just saying
civilization.
just this movie. I'm
Yeah.
saying like that's the thing is like
It
what
is
are you doing
it's
with your character, with your hero? Like you're turning him into God. And that
well, and
just
you're turning him into a bad god.
well,
Like you're
I
turning him
mean,
into a god that does not have the level of control and omniscience and, not a character you can put your faith
it's
into. You know what I mean?
I mean,
And well, that being said, though, it does have you understand young Barry being like, "No, I will save both my mother and the world simultaneously." And then you have this kind of like poignant moment where and that's when like the mysterious black figure that pushed middle prime Barry out is in fact an old version of the young
of Barry,
Flash
who's tried to do
who's
it,
been doing it for
countless
infinite
times.
times. Yeah, he's like an old man now, and he's all like his suit has become all mutated and twisted and full of Kryptonian shards from battling Kryptonians for a million years, I guess.
Mhm.
Um, but he and so basically the movie more or less ends with main Barry, middle Barry, having to explain to both the old version and young version of himself that this world cannot be saved and they're just going to have to let it go. And it's like, so sorry,
So
peace
now
out,
you get to create now carry that on your conscience, right?
Yeah,
Now you get to carry the deaths of billions of people on your conscience, or
it's
the
pretty dark.
non-existence or
It's
whatever.
pretty dark. And
Yeah.
when young Barry is first told this by middle Barry or main Barry or prime Barry, uh, what's he's like, "You're full of it. Like, there's no way that's okay. There's no way that's what's." And so, honestly, if you want this to be kind of a commentary on, like, Across the Spider-Verse, basically, young Barry is the Miles Morales character of this movie.
Yeah.
Um,
Which I wonder what's gonna happen to him in the 3rd movie.
well,
The
that's
Miles
what I
Now I'm
yeah,
jumping over to Miles Morales,
in
is
the
it'll be
Across
interesting to
Universe
see how
episode,
he
I'm
sort of, like,
curious to see what
comes
they
to term
do.
with it.
Yeah, what do they do with that?
Uh-huh.
It could I mean,
Mm,
I'm open-minded. I'm very interested to see what they do in the 3rd movie. Certainly in this
mm.
movie, they resolve it in one movie, and it's kinda dark. It's like everyone dies, and then Barry
Yep.
goes back to his timeline, and it's like,
In
wow, that's
including the berry and
yeah.
but again, we get a little bit of a happy ending because
Oh,
he
kind of. I mean,
he
let's
can
be
prove that
real.
his dad was there.
Yeah, let's just pause for a moment. You're telling me that this
Oh, well,
entire movie is about Barry Allen wanting to go rectify an injustice by going back in time and changing something innocuous, like whether or not she remembers to get tomatoes or not. And then what happens is he creates an entire world that ultimately has to die because of his actions, and on the way
but
out,
the
he does it
tomatoes are on the top
again? Yeah,
shelf,
on the way out, he does it
in the
again in
top
order to,
shelf
like,
now.
save his
No.
dad. He's like, "Well, I couldn't save my mom, so I guess I'll try to save my
And
dad."
that's the thing. Yeah, is
It's
so
like,
why
"You
is the
just
dad
this
going to
whole
prison not a
movie
canon
this
event?
yeah, this whole movie was about you ruining everything by trying to do this. Why did you It's
But
like he forgot?
what do we
Did
find
you
out?
forget?
But like you said, what do we find out? But it's not that he saved his prime dad. It's that he
Mhm.
was in a universe where where the tomatoes are on the top shelf. So now the dad looks up and the security camera catches him. So then he is
Yeah.
acquitted. So it's not
He never
even.
makes it back to his prime universe.
So
Evidently.
that's the
Yeah,
thing,
and
is he
and of
didn't
course,
actually
George
save
Clooney
his
shows
dad
up, right? Batman is no longer Bruce Affleck
because
or,
it's not Ben Affleck.
Ben
Yeah.
Affleck. It's which was funny. It was funny to see that in movie, George Clooney show up. Like, that's
Mhm.
fun, but it's
Well,
like,
considering he was considered like, the Batman or the worst Batman
oh, yeah,
movie
it's
was the
definitely the
George
worst
Clooney
Batman
one.
movie. He's not
So
a
that's,
terrible
of
Bruce
course, the
Wayne,
wink
but,
at the
like,
camera.
it's also really sinister. It's like, "Oh, so, like, you really are just, like,
Mm.
stuck and, like, you're never getting back home. Like, you're
Mhm.
never getting back to the base." In which I do think this is a reboot for the entire DC universe. So, I guess that was always gonna be the case, but
Sure. Who's
pretty
gonna deny? It's like, who's gonna
it's
deny
pretty
it,
dark.
You can
That's
never.
you can never go home
Yeah.
again, you know?
Yeah. So that's the thing is like now in that world, that Barry Allen is dead. He's as good as dead to that world.
Yeah, he's just disappeared. Like in the
So it's
prime
like now
universe, that Barry Allen. And is there another Barry Allen now?
no.
Is there like
So
somewhere
now no,
in
because
the
he died by Zod, in that universe too. So that's the thing is like now
maybe?
that same dad who's gonna go to jail, now not only is he gonna go to jail for murder of his wife that he didn't do, but now his son is dead too. The only person who thought he was innocent, the only person who believed his dad was innocent is now gonna be effectively dead in that universe.
Oh
So
boy.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Yes. Honestly, so what's the Christian moral of this
No,
story? No.
don't even.
No, I was gonna be sincere. Is like have faith in God. Have faith that things are as they're meant to be. And, the things that the movie does go to bat for is it legitimately like a couple times has a couple different Batmans tell Barry, the pains that we suffer, they shape us and we're not broken. We're transformed, we're changed, but we're not broken. And
Mm.
I mean, Michael Keaton kind of like is halvesies on it though, because Michael Keaton's speech is kind of like, my pain made me who I was. Then he's like, but you totally went to try to change it anyway. So I guess kudos on you, kid. And it's like,
Yeah.
is that the right take?
That's just the
Um,
thing is that it doesn't have a sense of direction, so it's just gonna go anywhere. And
yeah.
as
But
opposed to this show, which is, reaching its final
we are
cause or final
reaching,
destination.
yeah, we are getting the
And
telos going here.
with all if you really want to talk about it more, Jacob, we're just gonna have to text each other again, late at night and talk about the Batman and the Flash. But I know I do appreciate, especially with the quick turnaround and coming around quick, so that we could talk about this. And really, this was about the Flash movie, but it was about so much more because, like we've kind of jokingly said, time travel, it's coming up all the time, right? I mean, it's so often, and it's becoming this almost cliche. So again, if you guys, whenever you're listening to this, maybe it's in the future, maybe it's in the past, maybe it's in some other universe, but either way, I would like to ask you guys to subscribe to the show, leave a 5-star rating, so that, I don't know, some joke that I'm going to say, Jacob will edit it in later. But anyway, we'll talk to you guys later. Thank you.
You ended this podcast as poorly as the Flash ended.
Thanks for listening to Voyage Podcast. The Voyage Podcast is a production of Voyage Comics and Publishing, which seeks to create exceptional entertainment informed by Catholic values that inspire people to live a heroic life. Voyage Comics seeks to advance truth and beauty found in powerful stories. To learn more, visit voyagecomics.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.